Pac-Man Championship Edition, released in 2020 for the Nintendo Entertainment System, courtesy of Namco Bandai, or Bandai Namco, whatever the fuck they call themselves these days, and based on the Xbox Live Arcade game of the same name. It's a fairly faithful adaptation of the popular Xbox 360 arcade game, and... okay, I tell a lie. This is the bonus game that was included as part of Volume 1 of the Namco Museum's Archive compilation, a collection of Namco's NES and Family Computer games that include home conversions of arcade games that's already available in some form or another elsewhere. So calling this a review of an NES game seems like a bit of a cheat. But apparently this is an actual NES ROM that could play on actual NES hardware or equivalent emulators, assuming you have the know-how to do the ripping of the ROM from the program, and which I do not. Sorry, I don't. But despite this being touted as an 8-bit demake to NES standards, Pac-Man Championship Edition still feels too much like a cheat. For one thing, the sound quality is far too good to be NES quality, almost arcade perfect for lack of a better term, which you really didn't get with Pac-Man on NES, for example. Even during the tail end of the NES life cycle, you didn't get sound quality this good. So I'm guessing these are digitized sounds done through some gimmickry, and this sort of thing wouldn't be possible on an actual NES. As a point of comparison, Volume 2 of the Namco Museum Archives has an NES conversion of GAP Plus, I think that's what you call it, that was made exclusive to that package, and that feels more like something that could be done on an actual NES. And just to clarify, when I say actual NES hardware, I mean the original unmodified NES systems and none of those high-def analog things or whatever they're called that have extra features or whatever the case may be. I'm talking about the vintage box, the vintage top loader, or maybe something equivalent on that level like an FC Twin or something, but I digress. Anywho, Pac-Man Championship Edition on NES, derp, follows its high-def original well enough. Now, for those who have not played Championship Edition, the original version at least, of which this is based on, I'd assume some of you have played the DX version or the sequel or whatnot, you basically eat all the dots on one side of the maze, and a fruit will appear on the opposite end. Consuming the fruit will then transform the empty maze into a new maze with a new set of dots for you to eat. Now, while you're eating dots, the 4 classic ghosts will roam around and try to eat you, like in regular Pac-Man. But like in Pac-Man, you pick up a power pellet to turn the ghosts blue, and you eat them, and you score big points. Championship Edition adds a couple caveats. Eating all the ghosts and eating another power pellet before the effect wears off will turn all the unblue ghosts blue again, and you can eat them again for big points. So if your timing's good, you could eat a pellet, eat as many ghosts as you can, wait for them to respawn, and then eat another pellet that's you're laying around somewhere to eat the ghosts yet again, and you try to keep that chain going for big points. And that's the intention here. You're trying to attain as high of a score as possible within the time limit allotted, and in typical Pac-Man fashion, the farther you progress, the faster everything moves. Fortunately, when you die, you respawn at the point of death, and the game continues uninterrupted until you lose all your lives, or until time expires. This NES demake edition of Championship Edition only has 2 modes of play. The standard Championship mode that lasts 5 minutes, and the extra mode that lasts 3 minutes, and it's much faster paced as a result. The game also keeps track of achievements and your high scores, should you care for such things. There are no unlockables, no extra hidden modes or anything like that. What you see is pretty much what you get, which was typical of NES games back in the day. So yeah, this thing is a novelty, something that was made so it would fit in with the rest of the compilation of NES games. And for what it's worth, Namco did a fine enough job bringing something that was on far newer hardware onto 8-bit Nintendo. There was a concession made, obviously, given the original widescreen aspect of the original game, and so here the screen scrolls and wraps around the stage, which is a nice workaround. But more importantly, the gameplay made the transition almost without a hitch. It retains the fast-paced, frantic energy of the original Championship Edition release, never hits any slowdown. The transition to the mazes look fine by NES standards. I did find instances where the control was a bit laggy, or at least felt that way. I pressed the direction to turn and Pac-Man would just stall for a bit and get eaten by a ghost. That kind of sucks, but these are few and far betweens, and for the most part, it plays well as you'd expect Pac-Man to play, which is perfectly fine and well enough. There's not much else to say about this one. Graphically, it looks the part in 8-bit with very little flicker beyond the big text bits. The presentation's rather sharp. The sound quality's way too good to be 8-bit. I have my doubts on that, but still, very sharp presentation. Here's the deal though. Pac-Man Championship Edition got a respectable conversion on the NES in terms of the gameplay and mechanics. I do feel the sound quality is far too good for that level of hardware, but the rest of the package is still pretty solid. And if this were released as its own standalone NES game pack, this would have been worth picking up for the novelty of seeing something that was originally made for the Xbox 360 run on a vintage Nintendo Entertainment System. To see this running on actual NES hardware and perform the same way it did on that, I have my doubts on that because of the sound quality, but if they were to be able to pull it off, it'd be something impressive, if nothing else. That having been said, is it worth getting the Namco Museum Archive Collection Volume 1 of average quality NES ports of arcade games you could get anywhere else just to play this one game? No. Namco Archives Volume 1's output in general seems a bit lackluster, and really, setting aside the Championship Edition game, the only real standout is probably that Splatterhouse game. So that's probably why they included this, to sort of sweeten the deal. But other than the novelty factor, 8-bit Championship Edition isn't going to be seeing much replay. You play it, you admire it, and you move on to something else. Presumably a Championship Edition of the Deluxe Plus variety, or something to that extent. I don't know. Something else, really. Yeah. Okay, hello. Bit of an addendum here. I apologize for not cleaning up the sound on this part. Without going into too many details, an acquaintance of mine was able to get the ROM onto one of those EverDrive things. He loaned me his EverDrive so I could record some footage. Tried running the ROM on a vintage top-loader unmodded NES. And what you're seeing is a DVD rip of the end result. Virtually no sound, save for some hints here and there. Some notes of the background music, and that's about it. Which confirms that a lot of the sounds in the game was gimmicks and stuff. And maybe if you had one of those higher def NES clones, analogs or whatever, they might get the job done more accurately. But trying this on a vintage NES like I did, this is the result. Barely any sound. Oh well. Moving on to something else.